Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Woodland Walk. And today it's a great pleasure to be walking through the apple trees with Dr. Ronald Siegel, who is a legend in the field of psychology and has been working at Harvard Medical School for a long time, writing amazing books about meditation, mindfulness, and he has written a book that I'm very passionate about, which we will be talking about later recently. And we are going to have a talk today about the apple tree. So the apple in our community is all about cross-pollination. So apple trees, just one apple tree on its own will not produce any fruits. The apple tree needs another apple tree or multiple apple trees with different kinds of flowers, different kinds of pollen, so that the bees can bring it all together and create fruits, create apples. And it's a lovely metaphor for how we can cross-pollinate different communities, and psychedelics and other ways of working can come together, and we can create these orchards of diversity where the diversity is really what brings the magic. And the wonderful thing about apple trees is that all apple trees are equal. No apple tree is better than any other apple tree. The apples might taste different or look different, but really they're all just different shades and all are equal and beautiful in their own way. So we are going to have a conversation around this today. And thank you very much, Ron, for agreeing to do this.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
And the first question is, so in your experience of working with meditation, mindfulness meditation for a long time, and obviously being an assistant professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School, you are, obviously looking at the ways that practices influence our psychological and spiritual development. Your experience with psychedelics, your experience with meditation, and also your experience of psychedelics as well. How do you feel that these two areas of your work or experience, how do they relate to each other? Can you, talk to us about the idea of cross-pollinating meditation and psychedelics and why we should do it?
Well, I had a very early experience of the cross-pollination between these two realms because I probably would not have become a psychologist nor become a meditator had it not been for psychedelics. When I was about 17 years old, I was experimenting with psychedelics, which in the particular time and place growing up in New York in the late 1960s, early 1970s, this was not unusual. I wasn't a particular pioneer. All my friends were doing it, so I did too. And I encountered a very powerful non-dual or transpersonal experience, an experience in which sense of separate self dropped away, and experience in which I felt a profound sense of what Thich Nhat Hanh would call interbeing or connectedness with the wider world. Very moved by that experience. It felt quite blissful, and it felt quite sane at the same time. I remember thinking, finally an answer that isn't dependent on like what my rather unstable girlfriend at the time did, nor was dependent on my achievement at school. It was a whole other way of looking at the world, and I became interested. So who knows about these things? How can I make a life that aligns with this? And it was people in meditative traditions that had been exploring this, right? Because virtually all of the world's meditative traditions have as one of their aims to let go of self-preoccupation and appreciate one's interrelatedness. And that led me to become a meditator and led me to become a psychologist. So one area of cross-pollination are simply these pathways. I was once talking to a friend and colleague of mine who's about 10 years older than me, who knows everybody who was involved in bringing Buddhist practices to the West, primarily in Europe and in the USA. And I asked her, so how many of these real leaders in the field had as their entree, the thing that brought them to meditation practice in a serious way, had psychedelic experience? And she thought for a while and went through a rather long list of people and said, almost all of them. So this is a tried and true route and one area of cross-pollination. But then another thing that happens is that when people have had these profoundly moving, transpersonal or mystical or non-dual experiences with psychedelics, and they take up a meditation practice, they're more likely to recognize those experiences when they arise in meditation, because they've already been primed. We could think of it as almost a brain kindling effect, where the brain has experienced this before, so that then when we recognize it, when we come across it again, we're more likely to recognize it. And there were studies done in Switzerland, for example, of people who this is a slightly different angle on this, but studies who were Zen practitioners, who were serious Zen students, but had not had psychedelic experiences before. And they sat a sesshin, which is I think it was a 5 or 6 day silent meditation retreat in the Zen tradition. And on the second to last day, they introduced psilocybin to the individuals. And the majority of them said, "Oh, now I know what the Buddha meant." In other words, they had been meditating without the psychedelic experience, had the psychedelic experience, and then that suddenly informed that, and they said, "Oh, I see." So I think having the psychedelic experience beforehand primes us to be able to recognize it, and even dropping it in the middle of already an established meditation practice seems to be helpful. There's so many cross-pollinizations. Another one is that if we have an established meditation practice beforehand, it is likely to prepare us in a psychedelic experience to have it be more fruitful. My friend and colleague, Bill Richards, he's a kind of wise elder of the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy field. He was the last psychologist, at least in the United States, to legally administer psilocybin before the war on drugs shut down the research decades ago. And he said, he says, look, it's a pretty simple principle that we're trying to teach people as they enter into psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, that what you need to do is to try to be open to and trust whatever arises and move toward it. As he would say, if the anaconda leaps out at you, jump into the mouth of the anaconda. And that's precisely the attitude that we try to cultivate, at least in mindfulness practices in many meditative traditions. When my colleagues and I started writing about mindfulness and psychotherapy, we used as the touchstone of to be aware of present experience with, we've modified it a little bit now, we would say loving acceptance, right? This attitude of saying yes and being open to it. And as you practice doing that in your meditation practice, well, then when you enter into a psychedelic experience, there's a much greater chance that you're going to already have the ability to open toward whatever is occurring, even if it's rather unnerving, as it can be, because we can have, dissolution of sense of self, dissolution of sense of conventional reality, confrontations with our shadow, with all the elements of our experience that we've tended to push away and we don't like, all of these experiences which we might initially resist. If we've been doing mindfulness practice, we have a better shot at being able to open to this. Yet another synergy is that doing mindfulness practice is great preparation for sitting for other people when they have their psychedelic journeys, because when another person is going through one of these experiences, it can be a wild ride. They may be very upset. They may be having very unusual experiences that they're talking about. It's all sorts of novel things arise, some of which would feel threatening because they, for the sitter too, nothing is terribly predictable, right? We're really entering into quite an adventure here. And if we are accustomed to our own meditation practice, our capacity to stay present and to open to this and to be with the person without needing to control them, without needing to interfere, but being able to really hold space, as we say, is much, much enhanced by having our own meditation practice. So those are just a few of the ways in which there's cross-pollination here. And I'll actually add one more that comes to mind, which is when we have profoundly moving experiences, in a psychedelic journey, including those experiences that connect us to thoughts, feelings, memories, maybe past traumas that we have not wanted to allow into awareness, and they come into awareness under the influence of the psychedelic. When the medicine wears off, there's the question of now what and how to work with this. Well, if we have an established mindfulness practice, that gives us tools. It means that whenever these thoughts and feelings come up, we're going to be able to greet them also with this kind of trust, let go, and open. I had forgotten previously that those are Bill Richards' words that he uses: trust, let go, and open to the experience. And that's going to be enormously helpful for the process of integration, for allowing, because at least my sense of psychedelic journeying is there's the experience itself, and then there's the weeks or months afterwards in which we slowly see if we can begin to accept and open to these things in our daily life, and maybe gradually change our behavior in a way that is consonant with or flows from the insights that we had on the journey.
Beautiful. Thank you. So many synergies, so much cross-pollination. And I'm imagining like the meditation apple tree and the psychedelic apple tree being, standing next to each other and really creating some beautiful fruit together. I was thinking about one other way as well, that right now, kind of stepping back and looking at the psychedelic hype, perhaps maybe there's this kind of real sense of expectation and hope around psychedelics that and it's quite fast work. I remember a while ago when I first started learning about psychedelics, some meditation kind of teachers or meditation students would say, you're taking a bit of a fast track there, like you're trying to kind of, you're going to the top of the mountain like on the chairlift, rather than walking up, which maybe is very sensible sometimes, but there is something about the intensity and speed of it, and that from my experience of people that are long-term meditators, there's a groundedness that comes from having put the hours in, like over years of sitting, and that there is a grounded rootedness of that long-term practice and dedication to that, perhaps less immediately gratifying. I don't know whether you'd agree with that. Like meditators perhaps aren't looking for the quick fix in the way some of us, like I'd include myself, like, go for the shiny thing that's going to work quickly. So I imagine with these two trees of meditation and psychedelics that, the deep roots of the meditation tree and the deep roots of meditation teachers can be incredibly supportive to the slightly newer, although I suppose, more flimsy maybe, tree of psychedelics. Does that resonate with you?
It resonates very much with me. And in fact, it speaks to one of the insights that actually comes from meditation practice, particularly if we've done intensive retreat practice, like going off on a silent retreat for several days or longer. Because in my history of doing silent retreat practice, early on, there are some pretty psychedelic states that open up, right? There are some amazing moments of feelings of oneness, of feelings of, tasting food in a way I've never tasted food, seeing a sunset and being really totally present for it might arise. And at least early on in my retreat practice, I thought, okay, this is the goal. The goal is essentially, you don't mind the vernacular, getting really stoned on meditation so as to have these blissed out experiences. But what happens, what you learn if you keep at it, is that pursuing those states and clinging to those states actually, number one, gets in the way of those states arising. And number two, it's ultimately counterproductive. That ultimately what we learn is it's the attitude toward experience that we cultivate in meditation practice that's key, rather than the particular transient state. And that attitude toward experience is whatever it is, to really open to that. There's a story told by one of my mentors, Joseph Goldstein, who had brought Vipassana meditation to the United States in particular. And Joseph had been a very serious practitioner. He had spent 6 months in India on a silent retreat and was just experiencing so many of these blissful states of oneness with nature and letting go of self-preoccupation. And he had to come back to the States for some family business, which he did, but he was eager to get back and continue his retreat. And he went back to his retreat in India, and he said that the second 6 months felt like twisted steel, right? Everything felt wrong. Everything felt uncomfortable. Everything wasn't right as he kept trying to get back to these states of harmony and interconnection and bliss. And he says it took him about 6 months to remember the point of the practice is to open to whatever is here, to open to the twisted steel, to really investigate and move into, so what is this constricted, difficult state all about? Once he was able to do that, it began to transform again. So we learn that those kinds of basic principles that help us to realize that blissful states, non-dual states, spiritual epiphanies, they're impermanent too. They come and go. And the act of clinging to it actually winds up interfering with experiencing it. What's Blake's line? Basically, clinging to joy does its winged life destroy, right? That we start to actually see that in meditation practice, and that's enormously useful. And another mentor who's become a friend of mine, Jack Kornfield, wrote a book that should get a Pulitzer Prize for the title alone, which is After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. The realization that, yes, these ecstatic states, these blissful states, these states that involve genuine insight are super important. And then there's the day-to-day living of our lives, and how do we live our lives as wiser and more compassionate beings? And I do think, exactly as you're saying, that having gone through the many trials and tribulations of a regular meditation practice and the many, many hours of not feeling like such an enlightened being, but rather mucking around in the sewer of our minds and all of our conditioning and all of our pain and hurt, we slowly learn to be less attached to these states of freedom and more interested in whatever's happening here and now.
Beautiful. Well, that's a real motivator for those of us like me who struggle with a daily meditation practice. It's a real motivator to really remember the importance of that daily, doing the laundry, I guess, making time for the laundry. And also, I guess I feel sometimes that I certainly felt it with you. We went for a lovely walk in London's Hyde Park together, and I feel there is a presence when you're with somebody who has spent many years meditating. I think I can feel there is something in their presence that feels like it regulates my nervous system. And when I think back to being a psychedelic guide, I didn't have a super long meditation practice. I tried when I could, but I was a frayed single mother most of the time, getting to work with a nervous system that wasn't massively regulated, and being able to be present and caring. But I think when I look back on it now, I think, wow, if I would do something differently, it would be that I would have liked to have done it after having developed a meditation practice, so that I knew that those sitting in my kind of energetic field would feel more of that sense of a more regulated nervous system. Does that resonate with you? Do you feel that your nervous system is more regulated after meditation?
It certainly is more regulated when I meditate more. Although there's an interesting paradox in here, which is, there are different ways to understand emotional regulation, or what in some spiritual circles is described as equanimity. Because many of us imagine that what equanimity looks like is, I'm so zen, very little sympathetic nervous system arousal, basically, right? That, things happen, there's all the perturbations of the world, but my nervous system stays calm. And that's one model for equanimity. The other model for equanimity is developing more familiarity with and capacity to ride the roller coaster. So that other model of equanimity is, yeah, getting upset, yeah, getting frightened, yeah, going through days that are stressed out, and having the capacity to hold this experience and to embrace this experience such that we're not freaked out about the fact that these things are happening. So we're able to be with a wave of anger. We're able to be with a wave of fear. We're able to be with a wave of joy. We're able to be with, as Zorba put it in Zorba, we're able to be with the full catastrophe of life, with all the ups and downs and moments of clarity and moments of delusion and moments of being lost, and somehow have a sense that it's okay, sweetheart. This is all okay. This is all part of being a human being. Because frankly, given the nervous system that I'm endowed with, my path toward equanimity has been more the path of, let me learn how to ride the roller coaster, because yes, I can get very calm in the context of a meditation retreat, but in the context of my daily life, not so much. But I do think what develops is this capacity to be okay with it and to have some self-compassion around it. And there's a Scottish monk who's quoted to me as saying, the goal of the practice is to be a compassionate mess.
Love it. Oh, I love it. It makes me feel so much better, because I'm definitely on the roller coaster too. For sure.
Well, and as I remember our walk around Hyde Park, part of the theme was just, honesty here, right? Just what's it actually like to be a human being, and who's not posturing to be any better or worse than anybody else, and who's not posturing to be enlightened in some way, but there is a maybe part of spiritual awakening or psychological development is being increasingly at home with who we are. I mean, we're both psychotherapists, and we know that when people come into therapy, so often their wish is to have a whole new personality. Like, wouldn't it be nice to not have to be Ron anymore? Wouldn't it nice to not have to be Roz anymore, but to be like those other people who clearly are so much healthier and happier? And when therapy goes really well, at the end, we're pretty similar to the way we were at the beginning, but we've made friends with this peculiar organism that is Roz or Ron, right? So I think in many ways that is a fruit of meditation practice, and ultimately it's a fruit of psychedelic practice. I think they both move us in this direction.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And it gets me on to your wonderful book, which I'm going to hold up, and it's on our reading list, added in. Ron gave me this book when we went for our walk, and it ties in beautifully with the month of the apple tree, because a lot of the apple month is around, okay, we're a community of purpose. What do we want to do? What are our values? What do we stand for? How do we get together with other people that want to do something with us and create this sense of, I guess it's about activism. It's about, fruiting, it's developing these new projects. And some of the other books on our reading list for this month of Apple, like one of them is an amazing book by Patrisse Cullors, who is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. And her book is all about activism. It's called The Abolitionist's Handbook, and it's a brilliant book, but it's really like, right, what's gone on with all these systems? How do we, rethink them? And it's really inspiring, but it's also one of those things where in these kind of communities of purpose, there is often a lot of friction and tension and struggle, and hierarchies show up still. And one of the things I loved about your book, The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary, is it really, and the next line is finding happiness right where you are. It's so much about really truly coming back to our equality with each other and our connectedness with each other, and how that feels like such an important part of this work when we're joining in these communities of purpose, for them to really be a web, for them really to be working together. We have to get rid of this indoctrination that we've all had around individualism, striving, being the best, success, all of that kind of ego, the panicked ego, like the food for the panicked ego to try and kind of tell itself that it's going to be okay. So could you speak a bit about this? How in our apple orchard can we take this gift of accepting and welcoming our ordinariness and our equality with each other? How can we help that? How can that help us? Give us the gold, give us the gifts, the lessons, because it's very beautiful.
Yeah, no, I think you're saying something very important, that what one of the things that really blocks our capacity to cross-pollinate and to connect with one another is our fears that we're not going to be good enough, is our kind of relentless struggle to either try to stay on top of our game and get to feel that we're good enough, or are feeling kind of down in the dumps that we're not living up to some standard or another. I think it may be useful to share the origin story to the book, which is that a number of years ago, there I was already in my 60s, having spent decades, as you mentioned, involved in mindfulness practice, and this was largely in a Buddhist flavored tradition, if you will, and decades as a clinical psychologist. And you would think that out of that, I would have developed something like a coherent, stable, positive sense of self. I even had a good enough upbringing, but nonetheless, that wasn't what I observed. What I observed was, my thoughts and feelings about myself were going up and down quite regularly. I'd get invited to speak at a conference and I'd say, oh, people like my work, and isn't that great? And this will be, I'll share this with a new audience. And then a friend of mine will be invited and I'm not. And it's like, oh, I'm a has-been, nobody's interested in what I do anymore. Or I'd have a good, psychotherapy session. And I think, yeah, all these years of practice and training, I've really become skilled at this, and how lovely to be able to be of use to my client here. Or I'd have a session that felt disconnected or off. And I think, I know I was never any good at this. I was a good student. I could have gone into so many fields. This is clearly not my calling. And noticing, all of these fluctuations, and even sometimes on a very microscopic level, just being in a conversation with a friend and they tell me about something that they're doing, or the way in which they're evolved, where I feel I'm not, and I'd start to feel inadequate. And then the next moment I'd start to feel good. And noticing this roller coaster, this basically self-esteem roller coaster going on. And then starting to notice, gosh, virtually all the clients I work with have something similar, that they're either feeling stressed out, trying to achieve something or another, or they're feeling down in the dumps. And then starting to notice that the particular criteria we each use are so different, right? For one person, it's, well, intelligence, that I'm smart, that makes me feel good about myself. That happens to be my particular bailiwick. For someone else, it's physical attractiveness. For someone else, it's athletic skill. For someone else, it's artistic creativity. For someone else, it's popularity. Do people love me? Do I have friends? For someone else, it's adherence to values. Am I being a good person or not? Am I being a good mom? Am I being a good dad? Am I a good child, a good brother, sister? Everybody's got different criteria that are most salient for them. But what we have in common is we all have these ways of judging ourselves, and we're all going up and down a lot. And one of the painful aspects of this is when we're focused on this, when we're trying to either get love or feel good about ourselves through achievement in any of these realms, it tends to separate us from one another, because we're thinking about ourselves, and we're not experiencing ourselves, but we're thinking about ourselves. Psychologists call this a narrative sense of self. How am I? We're giving ourselves report cards all the time on how we're doing, and that's not great for connecting to other people. So it set me on a search for what are the antidotes? What are the most powerful ways that we can maybe relax this a bit and inch towards sanity, so that we're not so preoccupied with this? Because there are many fruits to not being preoccupied with this. One of them is we get to connect with other people. And another one is we get to have peace and joy. And another one is we get to actually be more effective at whatever we do in the world, because we tend to be much more effective when we're not worried about what do people think about me, but when we're actually focused on the project at hand. So you asked, what are some of the antidotes? Probably the most powerful antidote is the one that your entire project here is devoted to, which is making a connection rather than an impression. How can we, in whatever interaction we're involved in, have uppermost in mind, how can I connect to this other person or to this community? And almost all of us have had the experience of being with a good friend where we're having an honest conversation. And usually an honest conversation means we're talking about our vulnerabilities. We're talking about our feelings of failure. We're talking about our feelings of not living up to some inner standard or some outer expectation. And we're sharing that, whether it's that, things aren't going great in our relationships, or things aren't going great in our jobs, or things aren't going great in our relationship to our bodies or our minds. Somewhere we're sharing with people how hard it is to be a human being. And when our friend shares their genuine experience, all of a sudden there's a shift. It's no longer about two separate me's, but we become a we. And we become a we in that moment of connected vulnerability. And then we can cross-pollinate in very, very powerful ways, because we're not trying to impress anybody anymore. We're just really trying to explore what the experience of being a human being is. So one pathway is, in every one of our interactions, what if in this moment I work to make a connection, not an impression? What would that look like? And most of us know how to do it. And it's almost always about being honest and vulnerable. There's a long list of techniques. Would you like me to go through more of them? Or okay.
Please, as many as you can. That one is amazing. But yeah, as many as you can. I love that one. It's so memorable as well. Connection, not an impression. It says so much. But yes, as much as you can give.
Sure. Well, another one involves using our mindfulness practice, or simply noticing what's happening in the heart and mind moment to moment, to just catch ourselves in the act, to really notice what it feels like to get one of these self-esteem boosts, whatever our poison is. Let's say it's intelligence, which I've been hooked on since I was a little kid. And I say or do something in which either I get the reflection back that somebody thinks that was smart or useful, or I simply make that appraisal myself, and I start feeling good. And to just notice how that is in the body, what this feeling of, you can actually feel it, your kind of chest swells a little, you get a little bit taller, get to feel good about yourself. And again, whatever it is, you're attractive, you're athletically competent, people loved you, you're a good person, you're a good mom, you're a good dad, whatever it is that happens to float your boat in the moment, to really feel it every time you go up, and to really feel it every time you go down, right? Every time that whatever that quality is, we're not shining so brightly, and we're having the collapse feeling. I think of Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh, and to really start to monitor this, because when we do it, we start to notice, wow, there are a lot of these fluctuations. And upsettingly, we notice that these fluctuations are basically based on comparisons. It's about social comparison. Because if I think of myself as intelligent, implicitly, I'm thinking, compared to what? Compared to what standard? Well, I'm comparing it to other people in some way. Or if I think of myself as attractive or skilled at looking for a UK example at rugby, or I think of myself as a kind person or a generous person or a good mom or a good dad, I'm implicitly comparing myself to others, or to some inner standard that I've been taught about how others should be, about how we should be. And so these, these comparisons are inherently zero-sum games. One of us is going to be better than the other in some way. So if we can really sensitize ourselves to observing how this happens in social interactions all day long, we can start to unravel it, because we can start to bring attention to it and notice, oh my gosh, this happens all the time. And a friend and colleague of mine, Terry Real, who's a couples therapist, he suggests when you find yourself going up, tug at the balloon string. Actually try to bring yourself down to like ordinariness. If you find yourself feeling crummy about yourself, tug at the string to pull up, come back to ordinariness, because ultimately nobody's got any more value than anyone else. We all are born, we live our lives, who we are is the aggregate of all the factors and conditions that created us, our genetics, our family environment, our larger cultural environment, and we're all going to die. Ultimately, the whole primate game of who's on top, which is very hardwired. I mean, all the other primates do it. Virtually all social animals get into hierarchies and have dominance hierarchies of different sorts, different kinds of rankings. And it's a whole other story. There's a reason for this, because it conferred reproductive advantage. In other words, if you were the dominant male or you were a female consorting with a dominant male, the chances of your kids surviving were better. More resources were going to flow toward them, and you were going to be able to care for them more readily. So this is very strongly in our DNA to be involved in these kinds of comparisons. But actually seeing it, trigger warning, it's actually horrifying to see it. It has been for me to see how often this stuff comes up. But then we can kind of catch ourselves in the act and begin to try to make adjustments about it. And I'll throw in one other really reliable and important pathway, and that's simply practicing gratitude. Simply noticing what we already have tends to remove us from this game and this addiction to having to either prove ourselves or feeling down in the dumps, because when we're grateful, we're noticing what's already okay, what's already good enough. And when we're grateful, we're also in relationship, because we're usually grateful toward something or someone, whether it's God or nature or our friends or our family. The gratitude connects us towards something larger than ourselves. So those are just a few. There's a lot of techniques in the book, and I really tried to comb the psychological and spiritual literature for what seems to work best is developing self-compassion. There's all sorts of things that are helpful, but those are a few thoughts.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, the book has got so many. That's what I loved about it, because the first kind of few chapters are so compelling. And it's almost just reading the title, I was like, wow, it's kind of, oh, it really strikes you as like the extraordinary gift of being ordinary. Like it's kind of a new idea in a way for us in our society. And just reading the introduction kind of chapter, I was like, wow, it felt really revolutionary, because it was such a relief and such a release. And once you've read that first like introductory section, I've read it a few times now, and I feel like I want to read it like every few weeks to remind myself, because we are so hardwired for the other, like the more competitive way of being, the comparison. But when you really let it in, it's just so freeing. It's so marvelously freeing. And so just reading that first introduction something clicks, and it's had a really profound effect. I think it will for a lot of people. I'm sure it already has for many people that have probably given you feedback about how much it's helped them free them from that way of living. But
yeah, no, I'm so glad you found it useful, because in my insecure moments, right, in the ER moments, it's like, well, maybe it's just me that's preoccupied with this stuff, and maybe it's because well, I was picked last for the kickball team a lot in elementary school because I wasn't great at that, and maybe I just haven't healed my wounds, which is why I'm preoccupied. So every time another human being says, "Oh no, me too," it's a great relief to me.
Well, me too, definitely. But yeah, also as well as having that Me Too moment, it was a Me Too moment of like, wow, then also the rest of the book, you give so many practical ideas. It's really a practical toolkit, which is fantastic because it gives you so many things to work with. And I really think that for us in this month of Apple, as we are, it's so important to remember this, what you've talked about today. And you know, if we go, all of our best projects and our best ideas, if we go into these ideas with other people with this sense of, I'm probably not good enough, how can I be better than somebody, or how can, you know, that preoccupation of like the pecking order. And that as soon as you go in with that kind of intentional, that in the background, which is there, that's when things start to implode, and that's when things start to become really difficult. And yeah, you're not really looking at the project or really seeing what you can do, because you're looking for the pat on the back or the brownie points of, oh, I can do that, and like the balloon gets higher, or, you know, oh, I should have said that, balloon gets lower. And we're all ruminating all the time about all these other dynamics of like what we said in the community meeting or what we didn't say. And being able to go into these things is like, hey, we're all apple trees, we're all gnarly, we've got wonky bits, we're all scarred, we're just going to try and make some apples together, and nobody is better. And I love what you say as well about just, you know, really, really getting that idea around how all that we are and all that anybody is a random combination of genetics and life experience and this and that, and just that whole idea of like why our balloons should be any different to anyone else's it's so refreshing to come back to that. And to truly get it means that when we go into that community hub of creativity or values kind of collaboration, we go in with the intention of, I just want to be connected. And we catch ourselves in the moment of any time we start to go into, oh, but, and it's like, connection. It's like, oh, yes, freedom.
Yeah,
So,
freedom. It's like dropping a hot coal. You know, we cling to this stuff so much, and it causes us so much grief. And in the moments when we can let it go, it's like, exactly, it's freedom.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your work, because it's really profound. And I hope lots of other people in the community and everywhere read the book, and that it brings something to their, not just the month of Apple, but all of their family life, their relationship with themselves, the work they're doing, and yeah, and find it as freeing as I have. But I do find that if I don't reread it, did you find that? Just quickly.
Yeah, no, it's so, well, this is, you know, it's Darwin's fault, right? You know, we really did, all social mammals have, you know, are programmed to take these hierarchies seriously and play this game, because it really was connected to reproductive advantage. And our cultures tend to be organized along these lines, right? Virtually every culture has its hierarchical aspects to it. And even, you know, organic kinds of things quickly become hierarchical, like, you know, social media in some ways is organic, but, you know, how quickly does it devolve into who got more likes, you know, who got retweeted more often, who has more followers, you know, it's, you know, this stuff is, so we're like fish in water with this, both from our instinctual predispositions and all the reinforcement for this that comes from the culture. We do need reminding, because this is a countercultural and to some extent counter-instinctual project to do this. And luckily we have other instincts in us. We have instincts toward cooperation, toward nurturing, toward connection, and all of that, but they need our help. They need deliberate attention, such so that those instincts will be the ones that guide our lives more than the ones that are, you know, anxiously afraid that we're going to fall behind or be rejected or not be good enough.
Yeah, and I guess the more that we each make a connection, not an impression, the more we see each other doing it, the more we do it ourselves, the more that
Absolutely.
those other more benevolent, kind of beautiful, kind of happy, productive, connected impulses can really shine and thrive, because it feels safe to step out of the competitive mindset. Yeah,
absolutely. It's so interesting. Both of these instincts are very contagious, right? You know, when we're involved in communities that, I treat, you know, and have over the years, you know, many clients who are involved in, you know, pretty cutthroat business environments. it's hard to remember to make a connection, not an impression under those circumstances. I was at, it was my wife's high school reunion, and was talking with a guy who was a banker, and I was talking a little bit about my work and what it's like to supervise psychotherapists. And I think I said something to him about, the critical variable is, can we establish a relationship in which the trainee feels they can be really honest, that they can really talk about just how hard it is to be a therapist and just how lost and confused they feel, because then we can really work together. And he said, gosh, it's so interesting. When I flew over here, I was emailing with my colleagues, and our whole project was, how are we going to make an impression in this business meeting? How are we going to posture so that this client sees us as the organization to go with? So it's hard. There are all these social forces that pull in another direction. But if we're lucky enough to be in environments in which cooperation and honesty and vulnerability and letting go of pretense can actually become contagious, because we're able to share this with one another and make it safe for one another, there's tremendous freedom and joy that comes from that. And looping back to our previous conversation, both hanging around with people who are meditating and trying to work on themselves that way, and people who are doing psychedelic journeying and trying to work on themselves that way, even though no ego preoccupation doesn't just disappear, but at least there's a framework that honors that maybe inching in this direction might be worthwhile. That's a real blessing.
Oh, that's an orchard. It's an orchard of apples giving all their sweetness and fruit. And thank you so much, Ron. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and speak to you soon, I hope.
Thank you. Look forward to connecting again before too long.
Thank you. Oh.